In this series, we're going to go over cards on the Legacy ban list and talk about why they're banned and if they can be unbanned. In this episode, we're going to go over some of the cards we use as part of combos or to power out combos. Starting us off, we have Necropotence. This is an enchantment with a mana cost of 3 black. It has the abilities where you skip your draw step. Whenever you discard a card, you exile that card, and you can pay 1 life to exile the top card of your deck face down, and then put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. This card was banned in September of 2000. Why was Necropotence banned? Being able to pay 1 life to draw a card, even at the end of your turn, is still extremely powerful. Getting to draw this many cards for just 3 mana is kind of insane. For 3 mana, you usually only get to draw 2 or maybe 3 cards. Getting to draw as many cards as you want, as long as you're willing to pay a bit of life, is way too good for just 3 mana. The card's downsides simply aren't enough to balance this out. Having to skip your next draw step isn't really a downside when you're already drawing so many cards, and exiling the cards you discard is basically a slap on the wrist. This card was great in just about every black deck, as getting to refill so many cards makes it basically impossible for your opponent to win. Now, there are some downsides to this. This will leave you at a dangerously low life total, but this usually won't actually matter. As long as you win before your opponent can actually kill you, you'll just be fine. Fair decks were usually able to do this by being careful about when and how they played Necropotence. Back in the day, players would play Ivory Tower, an artifact that costs 1 that lets you gain life equal to the number of cards in your hand minus 4 at the end of your turn, to gain them a ton of life to keep drawing more cards off Necropotence and keep them healthy, stopping their opponent from killing them. While this is good in fair decks, the crazy part was playing this with combo decks. Lots of decks throughout the years, and especially in formats like Legacy, have 2 or 3 card combos that can just win you the game right there. Usually what happens is the player plays Necropotence and then pays half their life, at least, to draw into a combo. On the next turn, they slam that combo into play and win the game. And with being able to draw so many cards, you should be able to find your combo pretty easily. You just have to make sure your opponent doesn't kill you right then. Even worse, there are cards like Dark Ritual, a 1-mana instant that adds 3 black. With this, you can play Necropotence on turn 1. At that point, your opponent would basically never be able to kill you before your next turn, so you'd be able to win the game no problem. All of this power and consistency proved to be far too much, so Wizards banned the card to weaken combo decks in Legacy. Could Necropotence be unbanned? No. The card is still too good at drawing you cards. The weakness of drawing you the cards at the end of the turn are more relevant than they used to be, but the power of the card is just too high for Legacy. How could Necropotence be fixed to be unbanned? Increasing the mana cost to something like 5 mana would do it, as then it wouldn't be better than cards like Ad Nauseam that are seen play in the format. Besides increasing the mana cost, being limited to only being able to activate the ability a certain number of times, like 3 times, would be enough too, bringing it in line with cards like Cruel Bargain. The card does need to be able to draw you around 10 or so cards to be worth it, as you do need to draw into your combo or cards that can help you find your combo. Skipping your draw step is a big enough downside that players won't do it if they can't draw enough cards quickly enough. Otherwise, they'd use the better options already available in the format. Next up, we have a very similar card, Yawgmoth's Bargain. This is an enchantment with a mana cost of 4 and 2 black. It has the abilities where you skip your draw step and you can pay 1 life to draw a card. This card was banned in September of 1999. Why was Yawgmoth's Bargain banned? Well, the card is basically just Necropotence's older brother. For more mana, you get a version of the card where you get to draw the cards right away and you don't have to exile any cards you discard. There are 2 pretty big upsides that make the card a lot stronger than Necropotence once it's actually on the battlefield. Since you don't have to wait to draw your cards, you don't have to wait to combo either. Legacy is full of cards that allow you to make extra mana, such as Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual. With these cards, even if you're tapped out, you can start drawing through your deck until you draw a card like Petal to get your mana and finish your combo from there. This means that while it is more expensive, it's far more likely to win the game once it actually hits play. Could Yawgmoth's Bargain be unbanned? Yes, absolutely. The thing is, there's already basically better versions of it legal. We've already mentioned Ad Nauseam, but let's look a bit closer at what the card does. For 5 mana, this card lets you repeat the following any number of times. You reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand, then lose life equal to its mana value. The thing is, most spells in combo decks and Legacy cost 1 or 2 mana. Add in all the lands that are in your deck and the 0 mana spells like Petal and Lion's Eye Diamond, and the average mana value of a combo deck in Legacy hovers around exactly 1. This means that, for less mana, Ad Nauseam is drawing you the same number of cards as Bargain. However, there's more. The difference between a 5 and 6 mana is a pretty important mana threshold as well. You see, if you have 1 land and 2 Dark Rituals, you can make exactly 5 mana. This lets you cast Ad Nauseam and win, but doesn't let you cast Bargain. This difference in mana threshold will matter enough that most decks would choose to run Ad Nauseam over Bargain. The only decks that would really want Bargain would be fair decks like Nick Fit, that might want to use a card like Academy Reactor to cheat it into play. While this would be strong, these decks can't just combo off and kill you after playing the Bargain. And even though they likely will win afterward, playing and killing a 4-mana creature is a big enough task that most decks in the format could deal with it fine. All in all, there's just not a place where Bargain would actually break Legacy anymore. So, how could Yawgmoth's Bargain be fixed to be unbanned? The card is already okay to be unbanned, so it doesn't really need any changes. Next up, we have Yawgmoth's Will and Underworld Breach. Will is a sorcery with a mana cost of 2 and 1 black. It has the effect where, for the rest of this turn, you can play lands and cast spells from your graveyard, and if a card would be put into your graveyard for the rest of this turn, you exile it instead. Yawgmoth's Will was banned in September of 1999. Underworld Breach is an enchantment with a mana cost of 1 and 1 red. It has the abilities where each non-land card in your graveyard has escape, and their escape cost is equal to their mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. This means that you can cast them from your graveyard. And it has the ability where, at the beginning of your end step, you sacrifice Underworld Breach. This card was banned in March of 2020. Why were these cards banned? Starting with Yawgmoth's Will, the ability to recast all the cards in your graveyard is extremely strong. Not only does this natively give you a ton of card advantage, but there are tons of ways to use Yawgmoth's Will to make it even stronger. The most common use case for Will was to use a ton of cards like Petal and Dark Ritual to add a ton of mana, cast a draw spell like Knight's Whisper, and then use Will to do it all again, getting even more mana and cards out of nowhere. The ability to cast all of your spells twice made Will one of the strongest draw spells in the game. Basically, it just drew you a second copy of every card already in your graveyard, which was often enough to win you the game in a lot of combo decks. For an example, let's say your opponent's opening hand was a Swamp, 4 Dark Rituals, a Tendrils of Agony, and Yawgmoth's Will. So, you would cast all 4 of your Dark Rituals, making 9 black mana. You would cast Tendrils, which would copy itself 4 times due to Storm, dealing 10 damage to your opponent. Then you would Will, recast all of your Dark Rituals again, and then Tendrils them again, now getting 10 copies of them doing a ton of damage on your opponent and winning the game on turn 1. Now, this is a pretty specific opening hand, but the thing is, there are tons of ways to get to a very similar situation on turn 1 or 2. The result is that Will is simply way too good at letting you put your combo together, and the card was banned as a result. As crazy as Will is, Underworld Breach is somehow even better. It costs less mana, making it a lot easier to cast, and does a very good Yawgmoth's Will impression, but there are tons of ways to actually make the card better than Will. You see, there's a card called Brain Freeze, an instant that costs 1 and 1 blue with the effect where target player mills 3, and it also has Storm. By combining this with Lion's Eye Diamond, an artifact that costs 0 and lets you sacrifice it and discard your hand to make 3 mana, but only at a time you can cast an instant. So, how this would work is that you would get enough mana to cast Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze on the same turn. You would cast it and then target yourself to make yourself mill 6 cards. Then you would use LED to make 3 blue mana, discarding your hand in the process. Next, you would use mana to Brain Freeze yourself again, milling even more cards due to increase in your Storm count. Then you would recast LED and make more mana, and keep going back and forth between Brain Freeze and LED until your Storm count is high enough that you can just mill your opponent out. This infinite was how Underworld Breach was used in its short tenure in the format. Not only can this just be a Yawg's Will, it can be used in combos that Will can't, making it far too strong for the format. Can Yawgmoth's Will or Underworld Breach be unbanned? This is a no for both of them. Yawg's Will is still good at letting you put together their combos, letting them draw way too many cards and make way too much mana. Underworld Breach does the same thing to a lesser degree, but the Brain Freeze combo is incredibly strong as well, and combining that with how much value Breach can make you makes the card way too good. How could Yawgmoth's Will or Underworld Breach be fixed to be unbanned? These cards really just need to cost significantly more mana, and there's not much more you can do to fix these cards outside of what would basically be completely changing their effects. Making them cost closer to 5 mana would let them be strong, but would put them more in line with other powerful draw spells in the format. Next up, we have Oath of Druids. This is an enchantment with a mana cost of 1 and 1 green. It has the ability where, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if one of the player's opponents controls more creatures than them, they can reveal cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. Then they put the creature card into the battlefield and put the rest into their graveyard. This card was banned in December 2003 and extended, and remained banned in Legacy ever since. Why was Oath of Druids banned? It turns out there are ways to abuse this card to let you spin into giant threats very consistently. Thanks to cards like Forbidden Orchard, you can easily give your opponents creatures, making it so that Oath will let you spin into your giant threats. And those threats are extremely powerful. Cards like Niv Mizzet, Parun, and Grizzlebrand can draw you a ton of cards, giving you access to tons of interaction and making sure you can spin into another threat next turn. There are also threats that can let you end the game extremely quickly, such as Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, a massive 15/15 with Annihilator 6, an ability that forces your opponent to sacrifice 6 permanents whenever Emrakul attacks. A 2-mana combo card that doesn't require you to cast anything else is way more efficient than the rest of the combos in Legacy right now. Most of these combos require getting a lot more mana, such as the Storm decks in Legacy. And while there are tons of ways to get this mana, not needing to play these ramp cards allows you to play more draw spells like Brainstorm and more interaction like Force of Will, allowing you to stop your opponent from comboing or to try and protect your combo from your opponent's interaction. This makes the deck far more resilient and powerful, and puts it heads and shoulders over other similar combo decks like Show and Tell decks. Additionally, not having to draw your big creatures makes the deck way more consistent. In Vintage, where Oath of Druids is legal, the deck only plays 2 or 3 threats to spin into, whereas Show and Tell usually plays several playsets of their payoffs. This makes Oath decks way more consistent and less reliant on Brainstorm to put their bricks back into the library. All in all, this made Oath of Druids way too strong of a combo deck all the way back in 2003, so it's no wonder the card was banned. Could Oath of Druids be unbanned? This is a soft yes. While it is a very strong combo, it's not that much stronger than what's going on in the format right now. Combo decks have gotten a lot stronger over the years. The deck's cousin, Show and Tell, has fallen off pretty hard and isn't really all that great anymore. Another deck built around cheating cards into play, Reanimator, is also doing pretty poorly right now due to how weak the card is to graveyard hate. This deck is a lot stronger than those, so it would disrupt the meta game a bit, but it wouldn't break the format. Additionally, we should mention that right now, Oath of Druids is doing worse than Doomsday combo decks in Vintage, and Doomsday is currently legal in Legacy. These are different metagames, but it shouldn't be way too strong simply on a power level basis. Rather, it would just introduce a new archetype to the format that would shake up the metagame, and most people think the Legacy could use a shakeup nowadays anyway. How could Oath of Druids be fixed to be unbanned? This card is probably fine, so it doesn't necessarily need to be fixed. Next up, we have Time Vault. This is an artifact with a mana cost of 2. It has the abilities where it enters a battlefield tapped. It doesn't untap during your untap step. If you would begin a turn and Time Vault is tapped, you can instead skip the turn and untap Time Vault. And you can tap Time Vault to take an extra turn after this one. This card was banned in September of 2008. So, why was Time Vault banned? As it turns out, there were simply far too many ways to get around the downsides of Time Vault. There are cards like Voltaic Key, a 1-mana artifact that lets you pay 1 and tap it to untap target artifact. With Time Vault, this reads play 1 and tap to take an extra turn. Since this is a cost you can easily pay every turn, this allows you to take infinite turns. Once you do that, you just won the game. Just about anything will let you win from there. You could be playing Flying Men and it would be enough to close the game for you. Any card that makes it so that your opponent will literally never get another turn is obviously pretty strong. And Time Vault doesn't really ask for much. 2 mana is a very small investment, and you don't really give anything up to play this card. Similar with Oath of Druids, this card doesn't really require you to play a ton of other cards in your deck. You could theoretically slam both these cards into any deck and just kind of win the game sometimes. Though, if you're playing this card, it's usually the centerpiece of your strategy. This combo was incredibly hard to beat when it was released, so it's no wonder the card needed to be banned. Could Time Vault be unbanned? This is another no, but it's very, very close, at least on power level. While this card is very strong in Vintage, it's worth noting that the support cards of the deck are all banned in Legacy. The deck does get a lot worse with Tinker ban. Now, while this does make the deck worse, Time Vault is kind of the de facto best combo in the game. Taking infinite turns is just too strong, and the lack of any real cost outside of a small mana investment means that it's hard to get blown out by. There are enough anti-artifact cards like Stony Silence and Null Rod that the meta could probably survive the card's unbanning, but that's not the only consideration here. You see, Time Vault is a reserved list card, and quite the pricey one at that. Legacy is a very expensive format, but the cost of this card would be far too high for most players, and that's at its current price. It would likely get a lot pricier if it was unbanned, and without Wizards being able to reprint the card, it would never get less expensive. So the card likely is going to stay banned more to keep Legacy at least a little accessible in paper, and unbanning it isn't really necessary. So how could Time Vault be fixed to be unbanned? This is a little bit interesting, as Time Vault has gone through multiple erratas to fix the card. Originally, the card worked the way it does today, but in April of 1996, the card was changed. It was changed so that you could skip your next turn and put a time counter on it to untap Time Vault. Then you would need to tap it to remove the time counter for it to take the extra turn. The card then went through multiple erratas, but it was eventually returned to its original functionality. Wizards doesn't really like power level erratas and tries to avoid them as much as they can. Still, this solution does work, though it nerfs the card a bit too much. There's not a great fix besides increasing the mana cost. At 4 or 5 mana, the card is expensive enough that would probably be fine, though possibly still a viable combo in Legacy. Alright, and that's the video. What are the cards you want us to go over next, or do you have any ideas for future videos? If so, let us know down in the comments below.